All right, welcome back. Thank you. All we're in, I guess, an approach from the knowledge engineering side. There's a few different kind of recent things from the past week that we can look at as they are part of the systems area, and I think also show different fun things happening. However, first though, does anyone want to give any other any update or put anything on the agenda that we can cover first or anytime? So one, oh, does anyone want Tom or anyone?
I'm good.
Okay. So here's one interesting stream from from a few days ago. Um, so this Jonathan, I put in the chat. Jonathan Gorard is a postdoc working with Stephen Wolfram. So Wolfram and Carl Friston, and here's Dave, of course. Wow, real timeline blending. Um, uh, Wolfram and Friston had several conversations that were very high flying, very exciting. But this starts to, I think, fill in some of the pieces like underneath what they were pointing towards. So he started off by showing a deterministic Turing machine. That they call that a single way system. And so in these deterministic single way systems, you can talk about the category theoretic representations of um, computational complexity. Like you can go from here to here with four operations, or you can take this other route that, could have the same amount of total steps, or it could be a different amount of total steps. Um, Also, he talked about the something that George and others have talked about here, which is like the sort of duality of the set and the category theoretic approaches, whereas the set theoretic approach highlights the composition and the membership, whereas the category theoretic approach highlights the relationality and the functionalities and the mappings, but that the Yoneda lemma kind of clinches that those two representations are the same. So this is kind of classic Wolfram deterministic Turing setting. Then there's they generalized that into what they call a multi-way system. And so a multi-way system is a Turing machine tape where there are multiple rule sets that can be applied. And then those rule sets are either deterministically or non-deterministically chosen. So that's basically an action selection. Like given the tape in the head, the single way system always does the same thing, but then a multi-way system has like multiple options in that moment. And then they're talking about the kind of category or quiver, or I don't know exactly what term, but that describes like the total unfolding of a given initial condition and rule set, single or multi-way. Um, and like that facilitates them making like extending the deterministic Turing setting into this like decision making setting. Um, then a very interesting kind of recent plot twist in the whole Wolfram universe is for so long they were focused on the constructivist computer scientific approach to simulating systems like Rule 30 and the cellular automata, a whole new science, all of that. Um, but now most recently, they're like, well, to understand the computational characteristics of a system, you also need to understand the computational characteristics of the observer. Because if the observer is looking at a system that's encrypted, then the observer is going to think that system is just doing noise. But of course, it's not. So it's not enough to say like what a quote system is really doing or not. It's always embedded in this fundamental relationality of two cognitive systems, which is what Wolfram calls observer theory. This is basically putting a wrapper around all of the cellular automata work, all the Roolead, all the rule-based unfoldings that Wolfram has developed so massively. And now there's a relational layer with an observer on that, which brings us basically squarely into the ballpark of active inference. So it was a super fun stream, and it was I think and Dave motivated it, but I think with 587 views in 2 days, I think that we're hopefully bringing the Wolfram deterministic computer science, rule-based physics together with active inference, and other points were made. But I think that that's just kind of a nice um, piece of consilience that they came at this from building elaborations and building non-determinism into the deterministic Turing tape framework, whereas the FEP starts from like the flow-based partition of information flow, but there's essentially a convergence predicated on the interface between the observer and the system of interest. Just kind of want to summarize that because it was I mean it is probably going to be a relevant direction as Wolfram and others keep on chugging away, and of course everything with active. Um, yeah, anyone just go for it.
Yeah, going back to the meeting a few months ago, I think it was an in-person discussion. Sorry, the conference between Kristen and Wolfram. I think that actually was structured in a very good way because Wolfram has this very large framework. Uh, and I think one of the things they established early on is the things that Carl has some expertise in is a very tiny and extremely important part of that gigantic Wolfram universe. So to a considerable degree, that discussion was Wolfram interviewing Friston, what are you doing, and implicitly fitting that into his framework. And then if they, in part two, they confine themselves to pretty much that same scope, that is just the things that active inference has something to say about, I think there's a lot more depth than they can go into. And then that can provide a very solid, at least tentatively solid foundation for additional work along those same lines. So I'm sure there are things that Wolfram Physics has to say about the free energy principle and active inference that have not been developed very deeply just because Wolfram has his own sets of questions and in his own way of doing calculations and wayfinding in a particular portion of the multiverse. So I look forward to all of those good things.
Cool. Any other thoughts on this, or we can go to another topic or project?
I have a half-baked thought because both the Wolfram physics and the active inference or Friston sort of worlds are new to me, but you or the community your community seems to be getting excited about an aspect of observer coming into Wolfram's physics, which you can see some overlaps, in my understanding, to your active inference ideas. My sort of novice question is, do you get a similar sort of excitement when you think about second order cybernetics and bringing in the observer there? It might not have the hard physics and maths that Wolfram offers, but are you looking for, are you like an area looking for overlaps and added value from other areas of investigation?
Yes, I think second order cybernetics is going to come into play. He did mention it in the stream because, like, the key piece of ActInf with the observer is it's not just a sense making observer, they are making actions across the interface. So their computational model is like a three-way partition: system of interest, interface, observer. Well, two of the most fundamental points in active inference are, first, that interface is bidirectional. So split that into two. That's the fourfold partition. And the second thing is the action across causally intervenes in the system of interest. And then he's like, oh yeah, we haven't taken action into account. We've just been focused on like a sense-making observer who's kind of doing like more like summary statistics on the process. But then action re-entering gets into the higher order cybernetic looping, which qualitatively and conceptually, like, at least to the extent I understand, it's absolutely the right territory. But absent a really strong, scalable framework, it's hard to go beyond just talking about recursivity. Because you can identify recursivity or interactivity as important aspects of like systemsness and their engagements. But then there's a huge gap from the language to an implementation. Also, the language models are shortening that implementational gap outrageously. So now it is possible to probably revisit some prior texts and like here's just one example of a little. So this was with Claude 3 Opus. This is a new language model from a couple days ago. So, I mean, obviously these are their benchmarking results, but Claude 3 is beating the OpenAI and the Google. Yeah, everybody makes the benchmark, so they're only presenting the ones that like make them look like they're the best software company or whatever. But Claude 3 is very strong. And then Perplexity. So what I did here is I uploaded the PDF of Bucky Fuller with EJ Applewhite's Synergetics. So it's like 1,800 pages or something like that, 2,500 pages. First, had it totally summarized. Active inference, FEP, category theory, ant colony, synergetics, PhD dissertation. Just make the outline. Then in that tetrahedral coordination system with the category theory, write the code so we can bridge active inference and synergetics with the ant colony. Then, moving into a tabular form, active inference core concepts on rows, synergetics core concepts, I guess, in columns. Then, return to the PhD dissertation, chapters as rows, sections of the chapter as columns. And then several times I just said, just make it better. So this table is like basically the outline of the PhD. So I mean, you barely even need to know what the technical material is when it can be uploaded and referenced this way. And this is like the very low throughput manual. I uploaded one PDF and then I hand typed. Whereas with Systems Community Alliance or other kinds of repositories, then you're addressing not just one Bucky Applewhite book, but you could be addressing a huge amount of systems texts. Another experiment that I've been working on with language models. Here's Dave and I's favorite project, Sumo. So in Sumo, the upper ontology is basically stable in terms of size, because the upper ontology only describes the actual higher order properties, like before is before, after, and something, can't be itself and not itself and all that. And then there's these mid-level ontologies like transportation. So transportation has 3,400 lines of code, but most of them are much smaller. Like media is okay. There's several hundred to several thousand lines of code, but these are where the Lisp like programs that define the expressions are found. So as Adam Pease has developed it, these expressions can get loaded into a knowledge environment, Sigma, and then theorem provers can be used to find formal relationships and proofs. But even with the local language models, I was able just to copy and then bring the entire formal mid-level ontology into the context of a language model. And then do basically probabilistic operations on this, including soft queries like, what are all the entities that this lists? So that's not a formal query, but that's super informative because like there's no syntactic macro to extract everything that's named here. But you can really quickly load the several hundred to several thousand lines into the language model. But models with that context length, whether cloud-based models like Claude 3 or the local models, like 6 months or a year ago, we didn't have the context window to bring a domain ontology in. But now we can have formal systems definitions like in RAM, instead of having a hard drive with a lot of information. And then this question about, well, what should we bring into the kind of like buffer to operate on? Now the buffer is big enough to include a whole domain.
Yeah, and it's getting clearer than ever that some strong overarching framework has got to be used, because it's the combinatorial explosion of throwing everything against everything, every tool against every data set. It should be just blatant to everybody that you got to have a way to align terminology in a way that is somewhat trustworthy. I don't know any other framework than Sumo. The others that get mentioned are all tiny in comparison, even if they may be superior in some small constrained domains. And I don't know how to do that, because you remember the discussion a couple of years ago or less than that, that all of the major responsible players in AI were begging for governments to jump in and regulate it, and no government has done it. And it was fireworks went off when Biden and the EU said, "Oh yeah, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be preparing guidelines for how to carry out discussions." And what was initially wild exultation turned into, "Oh no, more inaction. We're going to be stuck with 15 different gauges of railroad for the foreseeable future. And everybody loses because everybody's being afraid of being called accused of overriding." too much governance. I don't know. But do you see that something that can be kind of forced? I mean, that would be spectacular if uh if between Wolfram and uh, Pease they could say, well, here it is, folks. This is where you can plug into. Here's a research team that was struggling to make sense of this very large knowledge base, and they decided, well, go and we ran their stuff into our framework, and now from something that you have almost no confidence in, you've got something that you can hand to an administrator in the transportation industry, and they can get quick answers to urgent questions. Why did this plane fall out of the sky? Don't give me a 13,000 page discourse. Just tell me, why did the plane fall out of the sky? Because we've got this strong way of correlating vast numbers of observations and lots of theory and lots of theoretical frameworks, and come up with something you can act on because it's all action based from word one.
I think that makes sense. I mean, to sumo, to bring sumo to Wolfram would be very interesting, and kind of like as with active, and maybe also even with the systems definition, sumo can be kind of like built up in parallel to domain experts, just observing what they do and the patterns that they have and disambiguating them. And then I could see sumo could logically kind of expound on the axioms of the Wolfram kind of universe, because those are rule sets that can be unfolded, but unless they're axiomatized, they cannot be proven or disproven per se. They're just proposed rule sets. And then also it'd be really interesting, the domain application. So it's like the Wolfram project seems to be like going into like the fundamental physics and, you know, space-time and the Rulliad and like the Big Bang and all the stuff, which is very exciting and foundational. At the same time, like household appliances, how will Wolfram apply to household appliances? But if there could be a strong mapping with the multi-way rule set evolution scaffolded by sumo, like if we could understand the life cycle of the exercise treadmill, then could the sumo language like look at all the rule sets of treadmills or something, and basically just be instantly deployed as like an inference language and technique in a domain? Because otherwise it seems very distant that the Wolfram research project is going to touch day-to-day mid-level sectors, because you could probably make kind of a toy model of like something. But then also on the Wolfram channel, people are doing, like I saw a airplane, like a aerodynamic simulation in the Wolfram language. So kind of like high performance scientific computing. And then I think that's going to be the kind of open challenge, is combining larger scale statistical analyses of language and of sensors probabilistically with very, very reduced like Linux kernel status code based formalisms. So maybe we have plain text definitions of systems like in ISSS. So we have a full definition of a car or of just like the windshield or something. And then there's like a bunch of sensors on the windshield. So then there's all this messiness of like the noisy sensors and their positioning. But their positioning is kind of like embedded in a logical plain text framework. And then keeping the statistical and the formal analyses paths both open and having them inform each other rather than try to make one irrelevant. Like, we're not going to make enough rules to prevent the need of statistics. We're not going to be able to have enough statistics to prevent the need for rules. And frameworks that don't either seem to accommodate that fuzzy and sharp, or either or prevent that, are going to be limited in those ways. Just some random thoughts.
Yeah, let me interrupt you. I'm having to use over the air signal for my phone, and it's warning me it's going to shut off. But let me urge you, Daniel, to get in touch with Professor Stuart Kaufman, Kauffman. He's older than me. He seems to still be active at the moment. And I would love to see him really jump in with his well-established work on systems that earn their living in the world. And a beautiful, powerful framework as of the early 90s. I think The Origins of Order is one of his main books. And the whole notion that you have got to get your goals met. You have to decide on good goals. You have to synergize on your goals so they match your ecosystem, because no one species can survive. So he'd be a really good guy for this. And yeah, go ahead.
Looks good.
Yeah, I hope you can invite him to do a guest stream soon while he's still healthy.
Okay. Yeah, we'll look. Any other just direction or project or ISSS? I'm planning to go to the seminar tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. PT with Carl H.
Yeah, I don't think I have the whereabouts. If it's appropriate, Daniel, could you send me a note about how to listen in on that presentation?
Yep.
Thanks.
I don't know where it is on the.
They usually send out an email to
Yeah.
the membership. I haven't been paying much attention to it, I'm afraid, because I just physically can't make that really a time anymore.
Oh, here it says June 9 to 13th. What are the dates of the conference?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, it is 9 through 13th.
Yeah, and then the Cybernetics Convention is also in DC. That's the 15th through the 19th. And there will be a lot of intermingling, especially on the 15th. They're in the same part of Northwest.
Cool.
I guess I can mention that I'll be putting out a notification pretty soon about the general systems theory SIG. See Rob's back, so we can start maybe holding our meetings again. And one of the things that I've been toying around with, and I'm going to run this by, well, I've already sent it out to the committee, is to consider, I don't know if you call it a test of, but a challenges for a general systems theory, to look at several of the major universe emergences, like the emergence of life, the emergence of sentient mind, the emergence of human consciousness, and then the noosphere. And there could be others. It's just that those are sort of the big ones that a lot of people are concerned with. And if a general systems theory is in fact general and covers all systems, then it should be able to provide some guidance to those who are actually doing detailed research. So one thing that struck me, I've been studying the origin of life problem for many years from a systems perspective. And one of the things that has struck me about the actual research, I just read a thing in Science this morning, I think, regarding chirality in amino acid or protein in living systems, and mentioned a couple of researchers whose other work I've been somewhat familiar with, and they're looking at these really small little bits and pieces without sort of tying it all together. And I think that's the field in general seems to be that way. So I'm thinking general systems theory might have something to boost that whole effort along. I will say the book by Smith and Morowitz, The Origin and Nature of Life on Earth, was very systems oriented, even explicitly mentioning several systems principles. So it's already out there, but I think it could be made more so. Anyway.
Now, maybe you could react to a remark from Professor Gordon Pask. He said, it looks like systems science, general systems theory on the one hand, and cybernetics on the other are interested in all the same things. And generally, the system science is more interested in what happens, and the cybernetics more on how and why.
Well, my reaction is the same one. They're both one and the same. You cannot separate cybernetics from general systems, and vice versa. Every cybernetic research paper will say in this system. And the same for complexity. You mentioned Stuart Kaufman earlier. It's the very same thing for complexity. You can't talk about complexity unless you talk about the system that is complex. And so I never seen any of those as being separate tracks. And that's one of the things I hope we can work toward in this general systems theory SIG, is getting people back. I mean, it's okay to be a specialist and do your research and find your thing, but you always need to tie it back to that which is the context. And that's what we don't see happening often.
And then Wolfram, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
And the one of the nice services that might be served by Wolfram Physics, if it pans out, is that, I mean, if it succeeds, is that it gives you an overall framework in which to evaluate the respective contributions of data and of theory. We know you need both. One can challenge the other. One can illuminate the other. One can feed questions to the other. But the sort of meta question of how are those questions, how are those challenges, how is that illumination actually manifest, he could, I mean, Wolfram physics could provide overriding principles that show, well, what sort of challenges should I be asking for from my observers? Which theoreticians should I send a preprint to say, well, I've got these startling observational results. Maybe I'm completely misinterpreting them. My theory may not be strong enough to even know whether I should be surprised. Rather than throwing, getting published and being embarrassed, maybe I can find exactly the right people. How do you do that? Looking at the ecology of scholarship as a field with its dynamics, with its strengths and its weaknesses and its ways to improve itself as an instance of a biological or biologic-like complex evolving system.
Well, our areas, what did Monk say? It's both a strength and a curse. We're in all the other sciences, you can do some really great work of being a reductionist and not worry about what's going on outside of that particular field. In the systems areas, we have to be holistic and reductionist at the same time. So find the academic and research arenas that are out in the world, except for the really large transdisciplinary projects. They thrive on just focusing in, and that's how you become successful. You get stuff published because you basically got down to some tiny detail somewhere. You have to wait for many years for some of the best thinkers in a field to come out with a textbook or a book, a monograph or something, in which they've synthesized all this and put it back together and make a big picture out of it. So I'm not sure how we're going to create a culture of publication that allows people to always embed their stuff in a larger picture.
This is a very deep question. I think previously we've talked about how, like, in your textbook, the difference between a textbook and just like a literature review, and about like, is system science in still a pre-paradigmatic position in that there is not yet normal science, normal system science. And so it's kind of like whether we think of it in terms of the volatility being too high or the standards not being set in the Wild West, like it just remains too high temperature to anneal, but it has to be in this Goldilocks zone where people are co-embedding work, but it has to be co-embedded differently. The kind of trivial librarian response, which is why the curatorial component with Rob and with everything is so important, is one larger picture that we can embed any work in is just the space of epistemic assertions or language acts or just social activity. That's far away to zoom back in, and it kind of strips us from the actual system scientific content at a first approximation, but it does provide but that doesn't take us any further than just system scientists, or system science is what system scientists talk about. But in some fields, that's their definition of the field too.
I just think there's some answers that in other viewpoints here. And I'm thinking of things that bridge the ontological to the epistemological, like ACOS, DIKW, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, frameworks which also reshape what it is system science, maybe in the way that Goethe did, centuries ago in his morphology, and in how Kant and Hegel and Heidegger about having multiple perspectives to get to the authentic thing. A very, very different framing or multiple framing going on, but maybe a closer match to reality, and so more applicability to things like single points of view, like science, or like philosophy, or like pragmatism, or like spirituality. They're all part of the mix there. So that's moving away from the slightly scientific point of view, from the computing point of view. So yeah, I think there's a lot of bodies of knowledge or ideas in my understanding from the systems points of view that could apply to this discussion.
Okay, what one piece I'll share on that. This is I wrote this with our colleague Dean over the last few days. It's a metaphorical comedy systems piece. So basically the situation here is we're at spring training, preparing to play quantum baseball, which is kind of already a somewhat developed metaphorical setting. And we're looking at the squat rack. And then we zoom in, and then we zoom in again. And then so the metal rack is the framework. The rack is the frame. And then there's the holes in the frame. And then you move around, and as you move around, you get these different visual effects. And then some of those lines of sight are like for seeing, some of them you could bring a thread through, some of them, and then you pin them. But if you want like the safe squat, you pin them. But then the position of the pinning is dependent like on the exercise and the person's height. So you can't just like weld every pin in, because then you've just made a piece of metal that can't be used for exercising. So when people are talking about the framework, and it's like, are we doing physical therapy, or are we doing exercises to get stronger, or like, are we just welding metal? Then we did a 7th inning stretch. This one's a political hit ad on the people who want to fill the framework with metal. They're not gap respecting. Here's a little who's on first styled dialogue between the executive, who believes that they're the exec because their exec concept is that they're the commissioner, but then the executor is like the frontline worker, so they have a bottom-up exec concept. So then they kind of get into this dialogue. It was just kind of fun and random, but how can we not have multiple perspectives on a shared framework when, even if it's a squat rack in the gym, two people are standing in different locations?
So how does it conclude your piece?
Then okay. 7th inning stretch ends. This is the zoom in, zoom out. If you step back, then it's like more of the moon is full, because in the extreme case, all of the rays are parallel. But of course, as you step back, that's generalizing, distancing, getting more perspective, but you're not at hand anymore. to put in the pin or to do the lift. So this is the kind of like all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful would be like if you could see from forever away and anywhere, and you could drop the bolt in at any time. Then ninth inning, closing questions, just a few more questions, and then we end it with this Shakespeare quote that Huxley used in his novel, Time Must Have a Stop, because it's the American past time. So how do you end in Kairos, that which is outside of Chronos? And then there's another angle, which is like they recently introduced a pitch timer for baseball. I don't know if anyone watches it. I don't, but I did go to a game recently, and they've introduced a like a shot clock for the pitch. So there's a timer in the stadium that's like 25 or 30 seconds or something per pitch. But previously there was no time in baseball, which is why you had people doing like rituals when they were getting up to bat and all like the slowness. But that's like another level of symbolism of how they reintroduced time to try to commercialize it further and make it variability reduced, like for advertisers or like for attention spans, when that changed like the fundamental basis of the game.
So is that like a probability collapse that ended that time point?
Which is a probability collapse.
When the clock stops, or we must have a stop, or you know, like a quantum collapse of all the probabilities of possibilities.
Yeah, when it's exactly the measurement, the final call, there's uncertainty. Were they safe or out? Was it a ball or a strike? And then the umpire makes the call. That's the collapse of the probability. And then another piece here is like, you know, building frameworks is all good, but we're in spring training so that we can get out there. And then like the part about getting into the game, like we don't want surprises on the way to driving to the stadium. So that is like the variability reduced component. But then the reason why we play is that so what happens on the field can be variability retained, which is why people watch it and bet on it and everything like that, because it's not known how it's going to play out up until like the last moment.
Mm, mm.
Just a little comedy. Any other things? Otherwise, I haven't heard back from Optimism. I don't think we will for a little bit. Block Fronts is still happening. I mean, I don't know, but March goes on.
March 19th is the equinox.
Oh, good to know. March 19th.
George, you mentioned Morowitz and his book, but he has another book, The Emergence of Everything,
Yep.
of 28 Steps. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh boy, am I. I got it right here. That's where I get, I didn't provide references in the, I did some citations. I didn't provide the references in that thing I sent around to the committee. But yeah, that's Tyler and I have invoked Morowitz hundreds of times. He's got a number of books. And I first became familiar with is energy flow in biology, which was my take on it was Prigogine was able to do a little hand waving and say, and this is how order comes out of chaos, da da da.
Yeah.
Morowitz went into the details and you know, I put those two together to get a whole picture. But anyway, yeah, have you read that Emergence?
And I found it in Len's library because Len Troncali has a big research area around origins as well.
Yeah, right.
And he has his own framework of the unbroken sequence of systems origins,
Right.
with differentiation and integration. But yeah, so I'd mark that one up to read as another theory of levels of everything, to have a look at that one.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's way back when Len and Tyler and myself and Lynn Rasmussen, who else was involved? Gary Smith was the moderator. We had fairly weekly meetings on this. This is when Tyler and I first got together because of his combogenesis and my ontogenesis, trying to figure out.
I've seen those recordings. They are on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, Gary must have put them there. Yeah, yeah. So we've had quite a few chats about that. There are more. I guess you're aware of. I can't think of his name now. He's in Seattle. He spoke at one of the Oregon meetings. Anyways, synergistics, which is very similar to what Daniel was talking about earlier with Bucky Fuller.
Hacken, maybe.
Huh?
Herman Hacken?
No, but there's another name, yeah. So
Okay.
there are quite a few out there that are thinking along these same lines.
Well, Kenneth Balding, of course, in his Skeleton of Science, but just about everybody does have some sort of levels aspect of everything. And I would agree that that is an aspect of general systems theory, to look at everything as a theory of everything. Oh,
Yep.
Yeah, it's really like it's maddening but gladdening. All of this, like curating and even finding out there's the scrapyard, all these squat racks, big ones, little ones, you know, just the bench, just the rack, just the pull-up bar, you know, all these things, and how to even cross compile them. And then just like there's challenges that seem fundamental to that situation, and then there's challenges that seem kind of peculiar, like they don't have to be, but yet they are because it's how it is. And then like what exactly is the connective tissue? I think that's like the GST SIG journey is going to reveal a lot. And it's going to be like, I'm just looking forward to seeing how this really plays out. And in the coming like weeks and months, we'll get closer to the conference. It's only in 3 months. And we'll see where we're at with our bench, squat, and deadlift then. Okay. Thank you, fellows. See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
thank
Take
you.
care.